And welcome everybody to Lessons for Coastal Communities. This is the second webinar in the Reset 21 series, hosted by the Southampton Institute of Arts and Humanities at the University of Southampton in collaboration with the Coastal Creative Network of South Coast Universities. My name is Joanna Safar, and I'm Professor of Archaeology and co-director of the Institute, which both develops and advocates for evidence-based arts and humanities-led research for social benefit. Before I hand over to our excellent chair, Bob Seeley, MBE MP for the Isle of Wight, I'd just like to say the usual few words on housekeeping. Please keep your microphone and camera off during the webinar. The chat function has been switched off for attendees, but the Q&A box is available if you would like to ask questions, and please do enter your questions. The webinar is being recorded and will be available to view on the Institute website and our YouTube channel after the event. So I now have the great privilege of introducing our panel chair, Bob Seeley. Bob is the Member of Parliament for the Isle of Wight and sits on the House of Commons Foreign Affairs Select Committee. He has lived in the Soviet Union and post-Soviet states, working as foreign correspondent for the Times and as a special correspondent for the Washington Post. He's had a distinguished military career and has written academically and journalistically on strategic doctrine and foreign affairs, as well as more generally on non-conventional and new forms of conflict. Closer to home, he has long and deep-lasting connections with the Isle of Wight. Indeed, I believe that he was once quoted as saying that representing the island is like being married to the right woman. He's passionate about the role of heritage and culture in providing solutions to regional challenges and in using the arts to drive inspiration, aspiration, education, and regeneration. Bob, I'm delighted to hand over to you to chair today's events and to introduce our panel.
Joe, thank you very much indeed. I think that's probably the most flattering intro I've ever had, and I think it's the first time ever anyone's ever described my military career as distinguished. Thank you. I feel rather embarrassed actually, but that's very kind of you. I'm going to very briefly introduce our panel. Well, give them a few minutes each to outline some key points. But before I just let you know who's going to be on, I'm going to outline the agenda, because we're trying to make this a free-flowing conversation, and actually because I want to try and find out enough, as much as possible myself. We're going to try to make the intros quite brief. I will occasionally maybe interject. We're going to try to outline, as I say, for about 2 or 3 minutes, people's key points and ask them to introduce themselves, and then go on to questions. So as I say, we can make it as free-flowing as possible. Culture for me is really important. I'm just completely frustrated by the fact that for 200 years, the Isle of Wight, 150 years, the Isle of Wight was one of the critical places for arts and culture, not only in the UK, but frankly in the world. So much was produced there, not only Turner sketchbooks, but we had a lot of artists who came to the island to paint, to sketch, to get away from the mainland. We had artistic communities. We had the Bonchurch School of Painters. We had the freshwater set in the 1850s to the 1880s. Tennyson's brother, Charles Tennyson Turner. We had poets and painters and artists galore. And I say sometimes slightly flippantly, but with a genuine sense of angst behind it, that, you know, the Lake District, one poet, 20 million visitors a year. The Isle of Wight, lots of poets, lots of painters, 2 million visitors a year. I don't mean literally that people should be coming just because the painters and artists were there, but there's stuff. The island inspired so much great art, and it is my huge frustration that since World War II, due to a lack of leadership really on the island, we have forgotten about our unique cultural heritage. And that cultural heritage is really important for me because A, I'm passionate about the island because it is the best place in the world. Secondly, it's actually incredibly valuable because art and beauty has a value in itself. But look, it's really important for the visitor economy. Did anyone ever consider to pitch for the Tate St Ives to come to Ventnor, take coastal? No, why not? You know, because we should have been doing this. And last but by no means least, it is absolutely critical for education as well, because we need to give youngsters on the island, from whatever their social background, class, race, whatever, we need to say great things are possible. Whether you're here or whether you're elsewhere, be inspired by some of the greatest people born in the last few hundred years and the amazing work that they produce. Whether it's Tennyson being, that wonderful poem, Crossing the Bar, about crossing the Solent. So it's a physical crossing of the Solent, but it was the metaphysical crossing of life into death. Or whether it was Tennyson writing in Maud about the sound of the waves on the coast and the screech that the retreating waves made on the rocks as well. And I just have a passion for this stuff, and I just think it's really valuable for many, many reasons. And I want to try to learn how we can get more culture back on the island. Okay, that's my slight rant over. I'm going to introduce Alison Smith, Culture and Heritage Sector Professional, Matthew McKeague, CEO of the Architectural Heritage Foundation, Dr. Susie Johnson from the University of Chichester, Seth Geddings from the Winchester School of Art, and also Jack from the Isle of Wight as well, who's joined us quite late notice, Jack Whitewood from the Ventnor Exchange, but Jack also organises the Ventnor Festival, which is basically like the Edinburgh Festival used to be about 40 years ago. So it is a fantastic thing. And if you're free, come down to the island for the Ventnor Festival this summer. Jack, it's all happening, isn't it? Because I've seen your emails. You're pumping out the stuff, really, aren't you now?
We hope so.
Fantastic. Right. On that happy note, I'm going to start with Alison. Alison, can I just, in sort of 2 to 3 minutes, can you just say a couple of sentences about yourself? And what do you think of the subject area, which I probably should have included? It's lessons that we can learn, that our region can learn from culture-led solutions to levelling up and the challenges that coastal communities have, and what national lessons can be learned for our region as well. But really, I'm looking for how can we use culture to drive all sorts of betterment, whether it's just an appreciation of beauty of art, whether it's education, whether it's aspiration, and whether it's a visitor economy. So can I just have a couple of sentences on each? And thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for the intro, Bob. Yeah, absolutely pleased to do that. So as Bob said, I'm a heritage sector professional, but I'm also an academic. I'm a social scientist, a doctoral researcher at Bournemouth University. And my work explores the interrelationship between the practice of public engagement and participation in culture and regeneration outcomes. Now, in particular, that's how we might evidence and measure them. And my case study is a coastal regeneration project, a large-scale one that's absolutely sought to be place-based and to transform the place it's going into. And in my consultancy work, I support a wide range of cultural organisations, be they places of worship, museums, galleries, heritage sites, local authorities, and universities. And I do that in 3 ways. One, I help organisations deliver heritage projects working with communities as equal collaborators. 2, I support organisations to help them respond strategically to policy agendas, especially in sort of very changing, complex cultural contexts. And again, to help them evidence their impact, whether that's to statutory partners or to funders. And also I help cultural organisations to become more resilient, and in particular that's through business planning and funding. I think so my particular contribution to the conversation that will follow will be that sort of intersection between my research and my practice, which says that in order to have these really effective coastal regeneration projects, or indeed actually regeneration projects anywhere, what's really necessary is that we facilitate that effective engagement and participation with communities. And I would situate that as absolutely critical to the success of these cultural place-based regeneration projects. And it's not really although my research is attempting to settle on some sort of model for this, I think that really this is something that's incredibly complex. It's very nuanced, it's very, very different. It operates at different scales, it's very multiple, and it's an ongoing endeavour. I argue that it needs an intense amount of work and care, and I use that word carefully. That effective engagement really relies on detailed insight and detailed evidence, that the relationships between the cultural partners and the communities and between different cultural partners take time, and they take support, that's financial support to enable participation. And when we engage our communities at the root of the success, it has to be really meaningful. It has to be in a way that meets their interests and it meets their needs, and it really foregrounds their expertise in the community.
So Alison, I'm just going to ask you a couple of quick questions, very And I don't want to turn everything back on the island, because I understand this is a much bigger topic, but I'm going to try to understand things in terms of my patch so I can make sense of things, so I can sort of ground what you say. Firstly, I would love to get a big gallery, sort of get the National Academy outside London down to the Isle of Wight, so the National Academy Summer House, using the old Winter Gardens in Ventnor, for example, or land at the Botanical Gardens. Are you saying that the age of big buildings as sort of cultural drivers is over? Secondly, how can you help galleries, for example, on the island, and Key Arts and the Carisbrooke Museum and Dimbola Lodge, how could you help them be, for example, more resilient? And thirdly, how could you work out the worth of a model? So if I came to you as the Isle of Wight Council and say, we're going to do this gallery here or this great idea there, how would you turn around and be able to say, actually, it's a really bad idea, Bob, I wouldn't bother, or no, that's great, and I can prove to you that it'll drive all this fantastic regeneration and improve education and improve aspiration?
I'll throw us three big questions. Is the age of big buildings over? Well, arguably, yes. I think there is a problem with big buildings, because unless you are able to fund them in more creative ways, I think there's a real reluctance from major arm's length funding bodies to invest in new assets, because there is such a need to invest in existing heritage assets. That's not to say you couldn't make that happen, and there might be private sources of funding for that to happen. For smaller galleries, resilience is really tricky. For smaller galleries, that's about being really plugged into their communities. It's about collaborating. It's about responding to the policy agendas of inclusion, of well-being. And those aren't easy things to do. When we put arts and culture on the front line and responding to important
Do you mean
needs.
kickboxing, Alison? Do you mean kickboxing to get money?
No, it's quite the opposite, really. I mean, kickboxing to get money is possible, and I think it can work. But I think morally and ethically, we don't want to work that way. I mean, these are really good things for us to do, and I think it's having worked on quite a number of projects where that is done well, it really does change the sense and the feel of an organisation. So just to give a quick example, if you were to, as you become more inclusive and you bring more voices in, more diversity, you have multiple interpretive perspectives in your culture. Culture is very, very multiple. It means different things to different people. As you do that, you improve the offer more widely. You make an offer that makes sense to your core regular heritage visitors.
To be honest, actually, that was an incredibly good answer to a slightly dumb question. But as I did explain when the first time we met a few days ago, I was going to ask some dumb questions, because that's the best way to get great answers. So, Alison, I'm so grateful for your answers. Thank you so much indeed. I am now going to come on to, who else have we got? Ian, because I can see your picture next to Alison's on my screen. Ian, you're from the Local Government Association. Really important people, because you know local government undergoing some changes, probably some not great ones to do with planning, but we're going to fight that separately. How can local government and the Local Government Association help and use culture to increase worth? And when I say increase worth, it's not just about a visitor economy, but it's also about education being rooted in the community, as Alison says, getting more people through your door, because to mean more things to more people. How can you and the Local Government Association help and suggest and drive that positive improvement?
Yeah, thanks, Bob. That's a really interesting question. So I'm Ian Lee. I represent Culture, Tourism and Sport at the Local Government Association. We're the membership body for councils in England and Wales. And we have twofold responsibility, one of which is to engage with Parliament and civil servants, explain this is what councils need to deliver for their communities. And the other is helping councils to learn from each other, to share best practice, tackle particular challenges, and come up with new creative ideas for how they bring places together and enhance their communities. Councils are the biggest public spender in culture, over £1 billion each year, so equivalent each year of a cultural recovery fund that was introduced.
What's it spent in? What's that spent on?
So the core things are the cultural service infrastructure, so things like museums and libraries, which will be found in every place, and therefore a great hook for keeping the supply chain going, putting on events, bringing communities together. But they're also increasingly commissioners of other services. They run the 16% of theatres, so a lot of regional theatre is driven by councils, and actually they probably own about 90% of the regional theatre buildings. They have those huge assets. They have their planning services, which can help design creative clusters, foster places where cultural and creative businesses want to locate. There's some really good examples across the country of how they've really brought particularly historic buildings back into use in a completely different way.
Ian, just a very quick point then, and I'm sorry, I should have, please feel free to introduce yourself at the same time, but I can see you're doing that very eloquently. Ryde Theatre on the Isle of Wight, sorry to bring it back to the island, it's empty. The town council, I think, are in the process of buying it. That's one example. What could you advise to do with that? Secondly, so my fellow islander, Jack Whitewood, on the call now, would you be able to work for Jack to work out how we can drive clusters of, you know, artistic endeavour? Because frankly, there's one happening in Ventnor. It's great. How can we turbocharge that to get all the good stuff we want from it?
Yeah, so absolutely. We're actually turning our attention to theatres as a concentrated piece of work because of all the creative sectors, they've been hardest hit by the pandemic and will be probably slowest to recover. The rest of the creative industry is probably going to bounce back relatively easy, notwithstanding issues in the supply chain and freelancers. But yeah, there's a lot of learning from councils, how a number of them have actually brought the assets where the provider has gone under, but they're leasing it back to the community so that the theatre remains a viable operator within their community. So absolutely you can do that. The other thing is really picking up on Alison's point, really, which is it's no good having your big shiny building operating on its own. If you are going to have a shiny building, I would agree with her that actually it's the community engagement and the journey that you work on towards your creative strategy that's really crucial there. So you actually have to think about actually how do we all interact, how do we get benefits, because if you can actually bring in that supply chain, you're also going to increase a knock-on effect on the other parts of the economy. You're going to start growing those jobs so that people locally feel they want to engage. And the other thing about the creative and cultural sector in regeneration is that it creates communities where people want to live. And the first question that businesses will say to council leaders when they're saying, why should we come to your area, is actually, they ask about schools, but then they ask what are the cultural facilities, because they know that they're going to actually be able to attract and retain employees. And similarly, things that make communities positive for their residents also attract visitors. So certainly in the Isle of Wight, you've got an absolute positive multiplier there that you could seize on.
I mean, absolutely. It's so frustrating that we sort of basically gave up on cultural endeavour after World War II. Ian, thank you so much indeed. Right, moving. Sorry, I'm sure it's my fault for waffling. We need to be moving this conversation on a little bit quicker, but it's entirely my fault. Right, Matthew McKeague. Matthew, where are you on my screen? There you are. Fantastic.
Hi.
Thank you. Please introduce yourself and just give us a couple of tasty morsels about your interest in this debate and how you'd like to contribute to it.
Okay, so I've worked for 20 years in kind of regeneration, the last 10 years in sort of heritage-led regeneration, developed a lot of kind of new uses for historic churches, which are very important spaces for lots of communities for various kinds of things. At AHF, we're a social investor, so we don't just give out grants, but we also invest through loans and community shares and other forms of investment, so not just about grants. For charities, social enterprises, community businesses, regenerating historic buildings, and we're running a programme at the moment finding new uses for historic buildings on the High Street. So alongside Historic England's High Street Heritage Action Zone, which you have one of in the Isle of Wight. So first of all, I think heritage is really vital to a place's uniqueness and sense of identity, and that's very important for economic development. The not-for-profit sector is essential to any kind of long-term place strategy, particularly in terms of arts and culture. And not-for-profit models are really important in places where the private sector is where it's weak, and that's a really big problem in left-behind towns. And just like Ian was saying, I think an issue for left-behind towns, if you want to call them that, I know it's a controversial term, the economist Martin Sandbu has said that places need a strategy of attraction. I think that's quite a good phrase for places. So it's focused on connectivity, employment, but being able to maintain spend locally. That's really, really key. And investment in arts and culture and social infrastructure.
Matthew, I'm going to interrupt you. Who could do a strategy of attraction for the Isle of Wight? Is that you? Do I ask you to do it? Do I get a bunch of people together? Who does that?
Maybe consultants like Alison could do something like that, but there's lots of good kind of organisations out there. There's organisations in places like Plymouth, like Real Ideas organisation, that I think could do that. We're working with a number of organisations in places like Great Yarmouth. We call them Heritage Development Trusts, that are working to kind of regenerate historic buildings in places like Yarmouth.
Can I just ask another? Yeah, sorry. just very quickly on, I'm sorry to go back to Ride Theatre. Well, I didn't say to Ian is that Ride Theatre is derelict, but it's a beautiful building and it means a lot to the Ride community, therefore it means a lot to me. So would we get somebody like you to come and say, please suggest how we can make Ride Theatre work as a derelict theatre, no chance of it being a theatre, but can we turn it into funky office space or something really amazing for the community?
One of our team can advise on that if they haven't already. The example in Great Yarmouth that was going to use as the St George's Theatre there, that has become a really sort of key space within the town. And one of the streets within Great Yarmouth, King Street, was 80% vacant 10 years ago. And now it's kind of 85% occupied, and a gallery is right at the centre of that. But they've also got a variety of kind of workspaces and houses and whatnot. So not-for-profit models really important to making places like Ryde and Great Yarmouth and Blackpool work.
The only Yarmouth I'm interested in, my friend, is the one on the Isle of Wight, but nice one. Marissa, can we make sure that we get Architectural Heritage Fund, contact them about Ride Theatre and pass on their details to Ryde Town Council? So I know it's being very parochial, but no time like the present.
Sounds like an appointment.
Matthew, thank you so much indeed. That sounds brilliant as ever. Right, who's next on our list? Suzanne Johnson, University of Chichester. Suzanne, a couple of words about yourself, a few sentences about yourself, and then what would you like to contribute to this debate?
Sure, hi. So I'm Susie Johnson. I'm a writer, I'm a published novelist with Bloomsbury and New York Times, places like that. And I work at the University of Chichester. So I've been working on a project called My Downs, My Home, creative writing focused on the South Downs. Particularly, I live in Worthing, so it's particularly focused on Worthing, literally grassroots, as in we're wandering around the grass fields. I'm looking at communities from the wards that score highly on the deprivation indices and figuring out how and why they do or don't access the green spaces in relation to heritage connections with Worthing specifically. So we know already that green spaces have a lot to offer in terms of mental health, depression, social interactions and all of those things. Also, of course, connected to exercise and all the benefits that come with that. We also know from Natural England's recent survey that people from deprived socioeconomic backgrounds often have trouble accessing green spaces, and that children in particular from low-income families have real troubles accessing green spaces. So my project is about finding out where the lanes are and the access to the downs behind Worthing and how to get people up there, linking to creative writing projects linked to the heritage of Worthing, which is one of those, which might arguably be called one of the inverted commas left behind places, which very similar to the Isle of Wight, and it's got, Jane Austen, Shelley, W.H. Hudson, all these big historical figures. It's also got modernist architecture and really interesting things, all hidden, really in need of visitors. We've also got a huge amount of people moving from London. Every time the train comes into the station, there's just more and more people moving. So it's a really interesting time to capture that energy with the people who are already here.
That's really fascinating. Sorry for mispronouncing your name at the beginning. I do apologise, Susan. I mean, there's two things that really grab me there. One, we have got a little bit of an influx on the island as well, of people maybe leaving because of COVID, so they're coming back. Very often people who might have moved 20 years time but are moving maybe 10 or 15 years earlier, and they're coming back with young kids when they might have stayed in London with those kids until the kids were more grown up. But secondly, my heart sinks when you say that all these people live really near green spaces but don't access them. And we probably have communities not only in Ventnor but also in Ryde and maybe in Newport as well that don't for whatever reason get out to the really beautiful countryside around them, be it the footpaths, be it the cycle paths, etc. And the more we can encourage that, it doesn't only have a positive impact on people's lives, but it actually has a significant impact on their health as well, because they're more likely to take exercise, they're more likely to feel better for it physically and mentally, etc. I just find it bizarre that people don't. Although I've got some very beautiful downs behind me on the island, I have to say, I probably don't get out and go for a walk as much as I should myself. So
so looking at those barriers is one of the hearts of the project. So things like transport. big roads like the A27 and people who actually live about 18 minutes away from the bottom of the downs but don't know how to get there, don't know how to cross. And a sort of cultural thing where people have looked to travelling abroad or going to the coast rather than turning back to the green behind them as a sort of recreational space.
Brilliant. Suzanne, thank you so much indeed. Right, I'm just going back to my list. Who else have we got? Seth, Dr. Seth Giddings, Winchester School of Art. Seth, you're the penultimate, far away, and please say hello and a couple of sentences about yourself. Sorry it's taken so long to come to you, do apologise, and a couple of points about the debate.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, so I'm an associate professor of digital culture and design at WSA, which is part of the University of Southampton. I'm currently conducting a research project called Mapping the Creative Coast with Joe Stark at the University of Portsmouth for the Coastal Creatives Consortium of Regional Universities. The project addresses the digital creative economy in the region. It's got two strands. The first is the production of an interactive map of creative businesses and practitioners in the region. This is beginning to give a sense of both the scale and diversity of the sector and vital data on individual companies for further research. The second strand is a survey of the digital creative sector, of the digital creative sector and industry bodies in the region to assess the demand for university industry collaborative research, development and educational needs and funding. And this will feed into both knowledge exchange strategies and research funding bids.
Okay, so they're both incredibly important. I mean, I hope the interactive map, the Isle of Wight's on the interactive map, yeah?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, is that enough Isle of Wight? I mean, are you making sure that you're hoovering everything up from the island, I hope, yes?
I'll in a minute, I'll put a link to it in the chat so you can have a look.
I think
it's about a fraction of the interest in the area, but there's definitely lots of little blue pins in the Isle of Wight.
Good, we like that. That's good. We like little blue pins on the Isle of Wight. And the survey of digital, your survey sounds really interesting as well, and I hope that we contribute towards it. Fantastic. Okay, thank you. Anything else from you? You've been fantastically concise. Anything else?
I had a few points coming out of that survey, which I could run through if you want. So they're pertinent for this discussion. So the first one is that neither geographical nor cultural identity of this region is self-evident or clearly defined, unlike the North East or Bristol and Bath. The sense of the South Central of the place is less coherent. Even the consortium's emphasis on the coast has proved problematic in the survey, with people in Winchester, the New Forest, questioning whether they fitted into this idea of a coastal identity. So it seems that's a cultural issue as much as an industrial.
But Seth, for me, it doesn't. But that's not about. I mean, South Centre is a bit of a sort of. It sounds quite modern, like it's sort of, you know, the New Forest has a fantastic, powerful identity of its own. The Sussex Downs has an identity of its own. Hampshire, with its association with, you know, Jane Austen and all that, has an identity on its own. And clearly the Isle of Wight, because it's an island, has an identity on its own. So you're not dealing with one identity, but a lot of very small but rather powerful and punchy identities, wouldn't you say? Doesn't that help us?
I think it does, but there's a challenge there in how we connect together those different identities, get them to work together. Particularly, we've been looking, the consortium was set up to address the government industrial strategy related funding, and a lot of those bids that go out through to arts and humanities departments is predicated on a sense of a place or an industry. And the last round, places like Bristol and Bath, South Wales, the Northwest, they sort of, and London, they kind of grab these because they could identify a coherent place.
But isn't our coherence the fact is we've got 4 or 5 punchy sort of artsy or sort of localized identities, and can't we just explain that better in the bidding process? Because we're not some sort of amorphous blob like Bristol and Bath, meow, sorry. But, you know, we're actually, you know, New Forest is, you know, a fantastically known locality and entity. The Isle of Wight, you know, likewise, Hampshire, likewise, the Sussex Downs, likewise. I don't see why we can't make that work for us. Because otherwise we're having to invent an invented identity.
Yeah, I take your point, but I think there's certainly the ideal. The question is how you actually do that. What kind of networks of communication? Do we look at LEPs, local councils, universities? All these bodies are addressing these industries in kind of different ways and looking, you know, to the southwest, to the southeast, to the coast. You know,
maybe it's the politicians writing letters to ministers and actually just supporting it more. But brilliant, Seth. Thank you very much anyway. And I'm sorry I'm taking way too long over this, but actually I'm enjoying the conversation, so I hope that you'll forgive me. Jack, last but by no means least, Jack Whitewood, for everyone on the call, I will introduce him myself, because I know what he does. He lives in Ventnor. He runs Ventnor Exchange, which is a great coffee shop, and they sell amazing, quite strong beers. They're sort of vinyl exchange, if I remember correctly, and it's just a great place to hang out. But more importantly, or as importantly, he also runs the Ventnor Festival, which is a really excellent, small, sort of mini Edinburgh Festival type thing. Sorry to Jack to explain it in such a sort of obvious way, but that's probably the best way to explain it. And Jack is also an arts, basically, entrepreneur on the island, of which clearly we need more. So Jack, over to you. What have you, just listening to other people here, what do you think we can learn on the island from it? And what do you think, what expertise can we bring over to the island to help us drive a sort of arts regeneration and rejuvenation on the Isle of Wight?
Okay, hello, that's exhausting. So many people to meet. Lovely to hear briefly from all of you. So yeah, I run with a team, a social enterprise, which is an arts organisation that is all about trying to build a creative ecosystem in our locality. We run a small venue and a festival, as Bob said. We run a big youth programme and various other activities. And I guess for us, it was an experiment in how to try and do something differently. So we're a kind of grassroots exploration in how to create regeneration from the ground up. And I guess the main things I would say is that I definitely think we see our cultural sector as an ecosystem, and every part has its part to play, and I think it's about building that whole ecosystem to make something work. And I think those big trees, those big institutions are important, but equally they sustain a lot of life, but equally when a big tree falls, it creates a lot of new life as well and a lot of new startups. So I think thinking of it as an ecosystem is a really great way to think of it. I think that for us, it's been, the other really important thing is that artists understand that it's really important sometimes to fail. And when you're trying to be innovative and you're trying to explore new ways to do things, sometimes that means failing. But when you translate that to a commercial environment, that's obviously quite difficult. And most people will not have the resource to consistently fail. So I think sometimes what blocks things or what makes things difficult is not having that resource or space to be able to be innovative and to try new things. And outside of the confines of places like universities, it can be difficult to have that freedom to innovate sometimes. So I think that's a real challenge. From the perspective of the island, I think there's a lot of potential and a lot of good things on the ground, but it does have a physical infrastructure that's vulnerable. And I think the lack of a university and traditionally inability to sustain talent has been a problem. And I think that it's interesting, obviously, in these COVID times, seeing whether that does reflect a change in focus in terms of investment and for people where they deserve to live. Because the traditional focus around cities and that kind of migration into the cities has obviously been at the detriment of coastal, smaller towns and communities. It's not an easy problem to solve. I think it requires a whole range of different things, but I also think it requires us exploring and testing different ideas. I don't think everything has a definite answer. Sometimes we need to explore, and I think it's having that space to be able to test things on a small scale to see what works, and to be able to have that sort of practical experience. Yeah.
Just before we go over to questions, and apologies again, we've taken rather longer on the introductions, but I've actually learned a great deal, so I hope other people have as well. What more do you think I could be doing on the island just about this? Because we've heard lots of people from lots of experts who've got a lot of expertise. So Matthew from the Architectural Heritage Funds, we could link him up with Ryde Town Council. Are there more that we could be doing with buildings and people in your neck of the woods? What could we be doing in Newport? I mean, what sort of grabs you when it comes to ideas and the expertise of the folks on this call, for example?
I think you have to invest in people before you invest in buildings. Like every organisation is only as good as its team, and every project is only as powerful as the people that make it. And I think it's having that kind of investing in people to be able to. It's all still very well renovating buildings, and that's definitely important, but in order to do that you need to have the people to be able to run them and to be able to manage them successfully. So it's investing in those teams to have those people available ready to take on those kind of activities. I don't think enough collaborations with universities on the island, for example, and that lack of investment in skills and training is a challenge here.
So you said we have a lack of collaboration with universities?
I feel so, yeah.
Okay, that's a really good point. I mean, my frustration is the university revolution that re-energised Bournemouth and Brighton and Portsmouth and Southampton and indeed Winchester. It's completely passed us by. It's just so frustrating. When we could have a great little campus in the top end of Newport, and there's lots that we could be doing there. Anyway, we don't get sidetracked on that. Joe, have we got folks asking questions?
Yes, absolutely we do, Bob. There's some really interesting things coming in here. One of them is a really on-point question about what would success look like. So we're talking about regeneration in arts and culture. Okay. What would we be aiming for? What would that look like if we were successful? Would it be jobs? What would be the ultimate goal?
Is it not okay? Is it not? Everyone just hands up and coming at it for free for all. But is it not everything? And is it not rather dependent on place? What's going to be successful in Ventnor? I mean, not even Jack and I would agree on that, because I want the National Academy to come down to Ventnor and use the Winter Gardens, and I want another 200,000 visitors into Ventnor. Plus, I want it linked in with the schools and local artists working out of that. And Jack might not even agree with that. So the problem is, I think it rather depends on your perspective and whereabouts you are. So, but I mean, does anyone want to come in and just say what success to them looks like in their particular field or more widely? Who wants to take that? Matthew?
For us, things like vacancy rates can be, one measure of success. Things like footfall are really important as well. And then you can do more kind of technical things, like there was a recent kind of study that arts organisations, for every pound that they generate, there's a multiplier effect of kind of £1.25 in the rest of the economy. So there's a range of things that you can do, but in terms of people locally seeing more shops and whatnot that aren't vacant is really, really important. And seeing more people around them in the town centre is really, really important.
Okay, so that's a general, but that's about, I mean, that's brilliant, but there's a practical success story. So vacancy rates, footfall, etc. Alison, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I did, Bob. I was just going to say that in terms of success, some of those harder to reach or underserved communities, sometimes asking them what outcomes look like for them as well, and not pre-guessing that it might be jobs or it might be a particular outcome that we might attribute. But having consideration to ask, what does it look like for you, and then actively working to achieve that.
Okay, I mean, that's one of the big learnings from Tate St Ives, not that I'm slagging off Cornwall, oh no. I mean, that's one of the big learnings from Tate St Ives. It was rather plonked there by a bunch of people from London, wasn't it? So if we were getting stuff, and Jack actually makes a point, it's going to have to be sort of people first, ground up, kind of community rooted, because that's where it's effectively, it survives out of season, but that's the way it actually binds into the your community with it. So it enriches everybody, not just visitors.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think things can come from the top down as long as they're coming from the bottom up as well, and they work mutually together, because you do need external influences and you do need them to kind of embed. And I think, and Jack, I love that term ecosystem. I think that's just really effective, and it gives a sense of that multiplicity and that interdependence of everything.
I mean, we had that slightly on the Isle of Wight. We've just launched Film White, which is basically, there's Film Cornwall, there's Film Yorkshire, there's now Film White. And that's been set up by somebody who's led the project, working completely for free. The lady concerned, I mean, she's not badly off in her own right, because she's a London-based investor, but she's also passionate about the island and is based on the island. And she's worked with cultural and arts groups to support them. And that shows that actually people from outside, working with people on the island and the Island Council and me, can actually get something done. And indeed, I think BritBox's first standalone series, The Beast Must Die, which is a 1930s novel set in the island, was actually filmed down on the island, which is good, because all the Queen Victoria, she lived on the island, but it's all being filmed up in Yorkshire, which is a little bit frustrating, because it'd be nice for us to get that cultural stuff down to the island and the jobs and support with it. Anyone else have anything on this question before Joe shouts out another question? Seth or anyone else? Anyone to anything to add? If you haven't, no worries. Okay, Joe, next question.
Yeah, so I think actually there is an interesting follow-up from that, which is, what does an effective consultation look like? Do arts organisations have the capacity and skills to engage in that? So how do we create that bottom-up development?
Okay, isn't it just a question of asking everyone? I'd say it's such a ridiculously dumb answer, sorry. I mean, is it just okay, Alison, over to you to save my blushes then.
No, I think there's a lot of asking people to be done. I think what consultations are straightforward surveys that you get a large number of people to respond to. I think they're fine. I think we must think about consultation as a continuum, where on the one hand you can be passing information and updating people, and on the other hand it's a really sort of deep involved process that just takes quite a long time, and it might be through creative consultation or participatory activity. And then it's where we've got a shared language. We can talk about public engagement and consultation in a way that we all understand, because it's tricky. People might talk about collaboration or co-creation or co-production or participation and not quite mean the same things, and that's quite challenging. So consultation takes, again, a lot of time, a lot of effort. It really understands people have got barriers to access that, not BSL interpreting, not providing things in large print, going out and seeing audiences and meeting people on their own turf, on their own territory, and finding ways to engage with more diverse communities and interests. So it's not a straight answer, it's complicated.
No, but isn't the problem is that once governments come up with an idea, some minister or some councils come up with or some MPs come up with what they think is a brainwave idea, and they go and try to sell it. If people say, well, we don't want that, we'd rather have this, then that's pretty much the end of the consultation, because the politician or the ministry pushes on anyway, and frankly sort of goes through the process of pretending, because it finds one or two people willing to chat. I mean, maybe I'm being a bit cynical, but I mean, I'm afraid to say that I think government action can sometimes work like that, can't it?
It can do. So if you've got an idea, if you've got a policy idea, and you're basically asking people, do you agree with this thing? And there's no real meaningful way in which people can engage with that. That's tricky. Something else is happening there. But if you're starting from a point of saying, what is this local place? What is the setting? What is the significance, and what are the opportunities? And what your consultation does is it derives local people's needs, it helps understand the barriers, and it looks at people's motivations and ways in. If you give people meaningful ways in, you're helping them down that path. And then from that bottom-up consultation, you're then able to give some shape to the idea and to the solution. And again, maybe both things do need to happen at the same time, but at all times we need to understand what it is that we're actually doing and what are we trying to achieve when we do it.
Thank you very much indeed. Matthew.
I think some of the kind of smaller projects there are really important. Like some big projects can be really risky, but because people can be quite inflexible about changing what that big project looks like, even if the consultation says something different. So the importance of some smaller projects where flexibility or failure or change is less kind of, it means less loss of money or public face or whatnot, is really to have those as part of the mix in kind of any place strategy, really.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the problem is that government are wedded to big projects, and some really dumb ones, not mention any by name, HS2. Jack?
I was just going to say, I think another really important thing is when you're really embedded in a community, you just start to understand behaviour. So as well as asking people what they think, we look at what they do. So, that's not always the same thing, what people say and what they do. And I think sometimes when you have that, what's great with you as a grassroots organisation is we're really embedded in our community and we see them every day. And you start to understand how the area works and what people do and their behaviour. And that helps you to be able to make judgments in a way which is quite rooted in that place. So I think that kind of real understanding of behaviour, and arts organisations are quite good at understanding their audience's behaviour. We understand how to sell tickets, and we do that because we understand who will buy them and when they'll buy them and what will appeal to them. We understand the barriers that certain people face in entering, going through those doors of a cultural space and what they can do. But I think it's all about being really embedded in that place, and you start to understand that. But yeah, I think behaviour as well as asking people what they want is important.
So, I mean, in a place like Ventnor, if you had, forget about money, let's say money was no objective, how would you, what are the next steps of growth, for example, for what you're doing in Ventnor? Jack, you've frozen. Is that me or is that you, Jack? Have you frozen? You there, Joe? Can you see?
Yeah,
is Jack frozen?
Jack is frozen. No.
He's back with us. So, Jack, did you hear that question?
Not really, sorry.
Okay, so forget about money. So if it's just ideas, and you could have whatever you wanted in Ventnor, what would be the next stage of a positive evolution of what you were doing to rope in more people, to get more people engaged and involved? What does it look like in a couple of sentences?
Well, big question. Okay, well, I think basically it's not about having one mastermind, one architect or one designer that just decides what the creative ecosystem should be. It's about us investing in the people and seeing what comes out of it. So
Okay.
if you invest in really great creative talent, no one decided what Tennyson was going to write about. No one decided what these great poets and writers were going to do. It's about investing in the skills and talent, and then we will discover what the creative scene of that place is. So I think it's about investing in that, and then they will decide what things they need to make that happen. And it might be, but it might.
When you say investing in that, does that mean just up at the Free School in Ventnor, there's more of a focus on music and art, or does it mean that we just encourage the University of Southampton or Winchester to actually set up a small-scale campus on the Isle of Wight? Again, I mean, I'm just wondering how you develop sort of artistic enterprise and artistic and cultural enterprises.
Well, I guess people need skills, they need space, and they need time. So yes, it involves sometimes formalized education, so through things like universities, but it might also just be people having the space and time to be able to afford to try new things and to try startups and to do different things. You know, that's very difficult for a lot of people to be able to fit into their lives. And I think that people need that kind of space and time to be able to invest in that. Almost everything, you know, every creative project, it takes time to work, and I think a lot of people won't ever get started because they just don't have the resource and the time available to be able to try that.
Okay, Jack, thank you. Skill, space and time, good answer, thank you. Right, Joe, sorry, next question.
Yes, so there's a couple of questions coming in about the UNESCO Biosphere Reserve designation, which now of course covers the South Downs and the Isle of Wight, and how that can be linked into creative and cultural work to provide a kind of research and income generation that is humanities and arts based. Yeah,
my simple answer to that is I would love to know. So Suzanne, do you want to kick us off? Because Brighton and South Downs biosphere, the Isle of Wight is now a biosphere and means nothing in UK law, should it maybe? Suzanne?
Yes, I think it would be interesting to know more about that as well. I need to check out, find out a bit more about it, but I just wanted to quickly add a little bit about how to consult with people particularly on green space projects, if they have a link between research and actually engaging with the community. And one of the main things is relevance. And so there's not much point talking to a community. Say, for example, if you wanted to talk to people who live somewhere near the South Downs who are single parents, for example, there's no point talking to that specific community that a policy-led directive has targeted unless it's relevant to them. So within the current COVID context, it might be staycation, health, can't go anywhere, can't travel that far anyway, and how do we rethink that and how that relates to that specific community and how that can actually factor in their day-to-day life. And without that relevant example or bit of information, you don't get the joining up in the consultation period with the people who are trying to attract into the Downs and Biosphere and etc. Yeah,
fantastic. Okay, Suzanne, thank you very much indeed. Anyone else on that, or the point about the biospheres? Anyone? I mean, the thing is about the biospheres, it's great to have the designation, but I'm not quite sure. I get the sense that places haven't yet worked out what to do with it, because it doesn't come with any government love and attention. It doesn't come with any cash. Jack?
What I would say though is it's like certainly locally on the island here is it's brought together organisations that may not have traditionally seen themselves as being in the same area. So we work much more with our places like the AOMB and environmental organisations than we did in the past. And as a culture, arts, heritage and environmental sector, which we did not necessarily correlate together in the past, this gives us an understanding and a sort of shared terminology that we now understand. And I think, you know, you talk about all these great poets and writers in the past, as you say, the landscape and the environment was a key part of that inspiration. And you know, as a physicality of an island is a very geographical thing. And so our environment is a big part of our culture. It affects the way that we work day to day in every way. So I think that it does have power in that sense. And I think it is bringing together different parts of the sector to work together.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, it literally shapes Ventnor, because you've got that massive Ventnor Down behind you. And actually, I was looking at old pictures 100 years ago. Ventnor Down used to be just a downland, and it was only after Garibaldi came to the island in the second half of the Victorian era and brought with him we started planting Italian oaks on the island, which are evergreen oaks. And obviously, somebody planted one on the back of Ventnor Down, and now Ventnor Down is covered year round in beautiful Italian evergreen oaks. So yeah, so I just thought I'd throw that in for no particular reason. Joe, over to you.
Yeah, no, I think that there's some really interesting things that are potentially very fruitful in terms of arts and humanities research, and there's a whole area of environmental humanities where there could be really interesting work that is done to create those relationships. I think Alison,
that's your next project. That's your next project. What to do with the biosphere?
Well, we've got folk who are really interested. I think Alison on the call is actually in that area. She has some. You want to come in, Alison? Maybe.
Alison, sorry if I missed you. Oh my God, have I gone?
Your camera's off, Bob.
Sorry, I'm sorry. Okay, I accidentally hit the wrong button, slightly embarrassingly. Alison, sorry, did you want to come in there?
No, I didn't have my hand up. Did you want me to answer a question?
To be honest, no, only that Joe said Alison and then I panicked and hit the wrong button. Anyway, right, that's enough of my organisational skills. Back to Joe.
Next set of questions then. We've got several that have come in on infrastructure in one way or another, about repurposing buildings for artists, about traffic and pollution, and about signage, and how they are important in terms of artistic and cultural regeneration. How can we develop ways of getting people to access in those very kind of nitty-gritty ways the infrastructure that they need?
Joe, when you're talking about signage, are we talking about, sorry to be again, are we talking about those brown signs on the side of the road? Are we talking about actually pointing? I'm not 100%
sure what they mean in the question, but I assume so because it's questions relating to road signage and attraction signage.
So infrastructure. Does anyone have anything they want to say about the infrastructure either of a place? I mean, here's a question for me. We've got the branch line regeneration. We got £50,000 from the Department of Transport to do an investigation into reopening branch lines. And one of the reasons I want that is because I want us to study whether it's feasible to reopen the branch line, the extension from Shanklin into Ventnor, because you then get more people who can directly travel to Ventnor. So it's about 2.5 hours from London. But then if we're thinking about the Ventnor Festival in the summer, or about, turning the Winter Gardens in Ventnor into some kind of permanent attraction and permanent gallery, for example, Queen Victoria stuff, plus, punk. We do very old, very traditional and very funky quite well on the island. It seems to be our sort of schlick. So we do Olive White Festival and, Queen Victoria. So if we can mix that sort of very traditional and slightly punky, can we actually then drive that regeneration process? So that's my contribution. I want to reopen the branch lines to get people visiting my community. So make Newport accessible from Portsmouth and to make Ventnor accessible from London. So you could do potentially a day trip or more likely to come down all the way down to Ventnor, jump on a little bus into the beautiful town centre in Ventnor, spend lots of lovely money, go and see the artists and do that sort of good stuff. Anyone else want to talk about infrastructure in the last 5 minutes? Matthew, is that one for you?
I've got more of an answer. I think Alison wanted to come in. But
sorry. I do apologise. Alison.
I read that question, Joe, actually. That's about how when you've got a small museum off the beaten track, do you attract people in? And then how can you send people back off? I mean, I think this is a problem whether you're a small museum or a big museum. It's realising that your visitor's journey starts from when they're at home or possibly even the day before and they think about coming. Are we investing in websites? Have we got joined up marketing? What do you do as an organisation where you sort of put yourself in the shoes of different visitors and say, well, how are they visiting us? How are they arriving? Where are they parking? What are they doing? Where are they stopping for lunch? It's not always the case to have lunch at your institution. You want to be pushing them out into the local community as well. So it's having a really holistic sense of that visitor offer. And lots of places seem to have destination management and destination marketing. But as a user of culture, I often go out, I haven't got a clue what's going on. I can't really find stuff. And someone said, oh, that was that amazing thing. Did you go to it? I think, no, I didn't see it. So actually, I just think it's really challenging. I mean, we're actively looking for culture and sometimes we miss it. So it's hardly surprising people who maybe aren't looking for it, don't see it. So I think that should definitely be invested in. As you say, Bob, also that physical infrastructure as well. It's the marketing and the branding that sits on top of it and pulls everything together in a set of visitor offers for people who live, work or visit your area.
Brilliant. Alison, thank you so much indeed. Anyone else want to come in on that at all? Matthew.
I was just going to come in on the artists question about sort of artists kind of being able to use space for free. you know, artists create value for places. It's not always monetary. It can be about confidence. It can be about the way a place looks. So the suggestion about what went on in Lewisham, I think how property is owned and how it kind of helps to kind of cultivate that value is really important. So we've worked with Ryde Town Council on a couple of projects, and how they could maybe do that is really important. But landlords often don't want to do that, so there is a role for the public sector or not-for-profit sector in doing that. But it's very, very important, and I think as we get more derelict town centre property, how landlords are worked with to maybe bring in some uses that are temporary or meanwhile uses is really, really important, and that does need some place in a strategy as well for how you develop kind of artist and cultural uses in a town.
You make a really good point. I mean, we have this dreadful planning bill coming up. Sorry, I probably shouldn't be so negative about it, but we have this dreadful planning bill coming up, and actually I'm going to be putting down a lot of amendments on it anyway. But one of the amendments I'm going to be putting down is compulsory purchase, because we have some fantastic buildings on the Isle of Wight, and it takes forever to compulsory purchase, and it's very easy to get around compulsory purchase because compulsory purchase is weighed in favour of landowners for good reasons, because of the link between freedom and you know, freedom from arbitrary arrest and arbitrary government back, you know, a few hundred years ago. But really, there are some fantastically beautiful buildings in Ventnor, and even some sort of quite good spaces like old garages, which if the council could buy them, or the town council could buy them and just say, right, here's a space for a dozen artists, somebody figure it out, somebody go and, you know, work out how we're going to get the money for that. That would be a really good way to revive a town. Because the fact is, if Ventnor, for example, had this reputation, which it sort of has as an artsy town, it helps encourage people to come there, and it sort of overlooks a slight negative feel that some of the bits of the town are a bit run down, because it's got the Ventnor Festival, because it's a fun place, because you associate it with expression, and for all these reasons. Likewise in Newport, we've got a lot of empty buildings. So again, it's landlords thinking creatively, but it's also maybe government giving power to local councils to compulsory purchase, which I would be putting down amendments for.
Great Yarmouth have done that really, really well, judiciously and carefully. And I think the right to regenerate, the new kind of right to regenerate that is being proposed is a really important thing. It's not just public sector assets that are part of that, but private sector assets are also part of it.
What is the right to regenerate, Matthew?
So it's the new MHCLG proposals that are about kind of community groups, or I guess developers as well, potentially being able to kind of buy or take ownership of public sector land. But it's at the moment seems to be defined purely in terms of public sector land, and our point is that in a lot of places it's private sector owners that are equally, if not more, so.
Matthew, do you have any articles on that, or can you send me a link to anything?
I'll send you our response that we put together for it. Yeah.
Was this part of the white paper proposals?
No, it's separate. It's separate. And so it's something that kind of, at the moment there's no proposal. It was about the I can't quite remember. Ian might be able to. It was part of the community rights that hasn't been quite working. Anyway, I'll find the details and send it to you. Okay,
fantastic. What are we like for time, Jo?
I think we're just ready to wrap up now. Are
we wrapping up?
We've got one minute to go. So
okay, I was going to ask everyone to wrap up, but unfortunately, if you've got less than a minute, I'm just going to. Can I just say that was incredibly interesting? Well, I learned a lot from it, so I hope other folks did as well. Strategy of attraction. Okay, for everyone on this call, minus Jack, because obviously he's already on the island, if any of you are looking to do pilot schemes or want to do projects when it comes to the strategy of attraction, or to help build resilience, or for anything to do with your work, can you please come and talk to me? And so we can actually get you down to the island to do good work down here, because we really want to do this and we want to make a success of this.
So Bob, I could just come in there and say maybe that SIAH, the Southampton Institute for Arts and Humanities, would be really happy to facilitate
come and visit.
Anything like bringing together people and creating a kind of roundtable environment, working with you to make that kind of stuff happen.
Jo, come down. We'll have a coffee in Ventnor Exchange with a few other people in June or so, and come down. We'll have a chat and see what the options are, and we'll have a new council officer and council leadership team as well, so we can maybe do something then.
Yeah, we'll definitely do that. Okay, so, I mean, I'm afraid we're running out of time. I'm just gonna thank everybody for being on the call for an amazing, really thought-provoking webinar. On behalf of the Institute of Arts and Humanities at the University of Southampton, I'd like to thank you all for your participation. And I know that this is only the beginning. We hope that it's going to be something which really kicks off a lot of ideas, interaction, and continued communication. So don't forget that this call has been recorded. You can pass on the link to others. And thank you very much.
Don't send the government the bit when I'm slagging off the planning, please.
All right. Goodbye to all our viewers. Thank you very much.